It's the Deadline Junkies podcast with your hosts, Jordan Imiola, Kirsten Porter, and Rand Shammy.
Our guest today is Lindsey Rosin, executive story editor on ZOEY'S Extraordinary Playlist and writer of Cruel Intentions, the 90s musical, and Death is My BFF. Welcome, Lindsey.
Thank you so much. So nice to be here.
Yeah, thank you for doing this. So could you talk about your journey to becoming a writer?
Oh my gosh. Sure. Yeah, no, that's a big question. But yes, I guess the shortest possible answer is I think I always knew I wanted to be a writer. I feel like that might be a universal thing. A lot of writers sort of grow up, wanting to tell stories, and I did from a young age. And I grew up in Los Angeles. I'm third generation LA native. I have a 1-year-old daughter, and she's fourth generation, which I'm pretty proud of, considering, there's not a lot of people that have stuck it out in this long in this city. So growing up here and around the industry, and my parents are writers, I think it was just it seemed like a very normal, sort of viable profession. I realized more and more as I work at it, how crazy the industry is, and what a pipe dream it really is. But been something that I've just always thought I wanted to do, and in the real sort of beginning for me started in theater, and I think of myself as a theater kid, and I went to Harvard Westlake High School, and at the upper school there's a one-act play festival, and they really encourage students to write their own plays, and that was where I started writing. And I'd written some stuff at the middle school in theater, different theater productions, but it was really the one-act festival where I got to write a one-act play, get it put up on stage in front of an audience, have people respond. And that was the first time that anyone, besides my parents, said that something I'd written was, worth watching. And so that was kind of the beginning and I love the immediacy of it. I think today, now, if someone has an idea, it's so easy to film it on your iPhone and put it up on YouTube, but that was just the technology was not quite there for my middle school, high school years. So being the immediacy of theater, which wasn't even that immediate considering how long you work on a piece of theater, but it still was you were able to get sort of feedback pretty quickly. So I knew I wanted to write from that age. And I went to college, University of Pennsylvania, knowing that I wanted to come back to to Los Angeles when I was older. And I was an English major and a dramatic writing minor, and I was in a spoken word poetry group, the Axolotl Project, which was a really fun thing to do. And I don't consider myself a performer at all, but I love the Axolotl Project's kind of like a family, and it was a great place for me to hone some of my writing skills. And the fact that I had to perform the stuff I wrote when I wrote a poem, I think it was an incredible background that I still pull from now, because when you're up on stage reading a poem, you really think about, is every word necessary? Do I need all of these pieces? And I think that was really good learning ground for me to really understand every word is important. And so sort of that theater piece and that poetry piece kind of led me to, I started writing TV scripts. And so being from Los Angeles and sort of knowing a lot of people in the industry, I wrote a script in college, actually. So I was still in college. And I wrote a TV pilot called Honestly, which is a script that I remember because it's what got me my first agent. It's what started getting me my first general meetings. And, just to speak as sort of honestly as I can to people who are fans of the industry or trying to break in the industry, it does, growing up in Los Angeles certainly helps, right? There are many, many talented writers that come here and make their own connections and build extraordinary careers. But growing up here, you just know people, people that you can give your script to. And I think I don't want to pretend that wasn't a way that helped open doors for me early. I think I'd like to think that I've, been able to prove myself, on my own merit at this point, but I just don't, I want to be truthful that it does help to be able to send an email to a friend of a friend or a friend's parent or somebody in the industry and say, hey, can you read this? Because it's a friendly, warm read. So I was very fortunate. And that's, I think, how I was really able to start working professionally so young, because I did sell my first TV pilot at age 22 to what was then ABC Family and is now Freeform. But at the time, it was ABC Family. And I had a general meeting off of that Honestly script, which I wrote in my dorm room at college. And we were talking about what they wanted to be working on and what sort of shows they were looking for. And they said they wanted to do something about summer camp. And so I am a camp kid. I was a camp kid, and I actually met at the time my boyfriend, who is now my husband. We've been married for 11 years, but at the time we had just been dating a couple years, and I was like, oh, I met my husband at summer camp, like would love to do a show about that. And so I came back a few weeks later and I pitched them a show about counselors at summer camp, and they ended up buying it off a pitch. That was my like 1 for 1, batting 1,000. If it was all that easy, I feel like I would have a lot more credits to tell you about. But that was the beginning of my professional career, and I got to join the Writers Guild, and that was right before the strike in 2007. So I literally sold a pilot in the summer of 2007. By the time the deal making had closed and all the particulars, and I was about to start writing, it was literally October 29th, and the strike started October 31st. So I sort of had like an entire microcosm of a career very quickly, like some success and then a strike and all the things. And that was a really hard time. As I'm sure you remember, just in the industry, things were shifting. A lot of the streaming services, Netflix Netflix wasn't Netflix at the time. I think they were still sending DVDs in the mail in 2007, but that was what the strike was about, all the streaming platforms that were coming. And so, it was tough to try to start at that moment in time. But everyone gets sort of the time that every era is hard. So that was what was hard about my first few years. And that pilot, I did finish the pilot after the strike, but that didn't end up going forward. And so off of that, I was very fortunate to be able to stay in development. So I was able to develop many pilots that you've never heard of. Some of which sold, some of which didn't. And I would say, I also had some other jobs. Like I worked, part-time jobs, and was just, trying to continue to develop and continue to pay my bills and all the things that you have to do at that time. But I did sell a few more pilots over the years. And then I wrote some features, and I was doing some ghostwriting for books. So I was like, just knocking on every, trying to push on every door that I possibly could. I had a lot of meetings in this era, this like sort of time period where I met executives that like, I'd write a script, I'd meet an executive off of that script, that executive would introduce me to someone who would introduce me to someone, and that third someone down the line would lead to an opportunity to develop a pilot. So it was a lot of, my brother-in-law actually said a lot of your early career is like putting paint on the wall. So it's like coats of paint. So I was just like painting the walls and just like trying to make them the right color. So a lot of those years passed. And then things were, I wouldn't want to say like nothing was happening, because in a way, like, even though I was able to have some early success and was able to sell pilots and had practice pitching, there's that 10,000 hour rule about writing. And so I think during that time I was getting my 10,000 hours in, and I'm a far better writer now than I was then. And I look back even at things that sold at the time, and, there's a cringe factor. But I definitely, sort of feel like there's a broken, it was definitely a broken road to where I am now, but I learned a lot during that time period, and also about the kind of projects I wanted to be doing and what really suited my style. So right around then, this probably took me all the way up to like 2015, right, in various like fits and starts. And I mentioned that I was doing some ghostwriting, and I through ghostwriting these different book proposals, I was able to sell my first novel. So I wrote a novel that's called Cherry, and it's about 4 teenage girlfriends who make a pact to lose their virginity before high school graduation. So sort of like a female American Pie, but with more feelings than frozen yogurt. And it's really about female friendship, which is like a lot of what I like to write about, boils down to female friendships and teenagers and that whole era. And so Cherry had just sold, and it was right after Cherry sold that I got a call on like a Friday night from someone who was a friend of a friend being like, I need a director for Cruel Intentions, the musical. Are you interested? And I'm, a 90s kid. Like I said, I grew up with a theater background. I didn't mention, but over those years of frustration, I was just like, I did something called Put It Up on Stage, where I was just literally taking my failed pilots that no one wanted to buy and doing them as one-act plays in theater, like still, from my teenage self to my 20-something self. And I had just done one, which I still think would make a great pilot, which was called Sext Me Maybe, which was right around the time that Call Me Maybe was a big hit, which was about a woman who got like mistakenly wrapped up in like a political sexting scandal. Like she got like accidentally sexted and didn't know the person who was sexting her, but then it happened to be a politician. And I just remember there were all those stories breaking at the time of like Anthony Weiner, and you'd see like the 8 headshots of the women who had all been sexted, and I was like, who's the 8th woman? Like, what is she? So it was sort of that story about this random girl, and that sexed me maybe. And I just done it on stage, and that's why I got this call to be the director for Cruel Intentions musical. And so I ended up then collaborating with someone who I did not know at the time, but is now one of my best friends and frequent collaborators named Jordan Ross. And so we ended up basically redeveloping the Cruel musical into what it is now. And we started, it opened at the Rockwell Table and Stage, which I think just actually officially closed, which is sad. So I'm sorry to hear that that's another casualty of this era. But we did Cruel at the Rockwell, and we ran for about 6 months, and then through a lot of, it's funny, like I said, I did all the traditional things, right? I did all the water bottle tour, the networking meetings, the writing spec scripts, the meeting all the people, every connection, and then it happened to be this like little show in a bar that I like didn't even tell my agent and manager that I was doing. That ended up being the thing that like just really catapulted me to another level in my career. And so through that, I was able to, a lot of doors opened, and we were able to sell the Cruel Intentions as a TV pilot along with Roger Cumble, who wrote and directed the movie. And Jordan and I pitched him a take on Cruel TV, which became a pilot for NBC, which we actually got to produce. And I sold a pilot to, in that same little era, I sold a pilot to CBS called Squad Goals with Ryan Seacrest producing. And that was when, and then the Cruel musical continued to take off, and we ended up doing it in New York. I directed it off Broadway, and we ran for 6 months off Broadway. And then we just did a national tour actually. And we had just, we were just ready to start licensing the show so that like anybody in any theater across America could do the show. And last year around this time, there were, the first 10 theaters lined up to license the show. And of course, coronavirus, but I hope on the other side of this that people will be able to license Cruel musical. We licensed it to producers in the UK, and they did it at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. So that was super cool. And I got to go see it at the Edinburgh Theatre Festival, which is one of my favorite theater festivals. But like I said, that era, like the Cruel musical really just opened a lot of doors. And since then, I guess right before Cruel musical, like I'd written pilots, like I said, for Freeform, for MTV. I'd sold, a lot of different production companies. But after that 2015, things really started taking off. So I wrote a pilot for NBC, ABC, Sci-Fi, and then landed on ZOEY'S Extraordinary Playlist, which is also a full circle moment for me because my friend and mentor, Austin Winsberg, who created ZOEY'S, is somebody that I've known all the way since I was back in high school writing those one-act plays, because I won a few national playwriting contests, through the Blank Theater Festival. I don't know if anyone knows about the Blank Theater Company, but they have a Young Playwrights Festival, and they do great work. And they every year pick about 15, I think, one-act plays to get professional productions. And mine, I won 2 years, and Austin was my mentor at one of those years. And so we kept in touch over the years, and he's been an incredible, source of just lots of, writing knowledge. And he actually mentored me on a script that I wrote before that. And so we just became this full circle moment where our love of theater and musicals and everything combined. And he wrote this brilliant pilot for ZOEY'S Extraordinary Playlist. And I remember pretty early on, he mentioned it to me. And I'm really fortunate that he hired me to write on the first season. And I had a great experience. I got to spend a pretty substantial amount of time up in Vancouver helping to produce the show. And unfortunately, I didn't get to go this season because there's a 2-week quarantine into Canada. So I did miss out on that. And we, first season, we had a traditional writer's room. And then this season, our room was all a Zoom room, as all the rooms were. So that's where I find myself now, having just finished my second season on ZOEY'S and, working on new projects and development and my second novel and, things that are both the same, but also different as to like where I've been before. So that's me.
The journey.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What a wild story you have. Lots of turns. That's epic.
Thank you. Yeah. In some ways, it's like, I feel like there's some repeating themes, which I appreciate. I feel like I'm, some people, like I said, I knew what I wanted to do from age, 10, age 15. And I think I always sort of romanticized like the person, even when we got in college age, who like didn't know and was going to like explore lots of different things and like find their passion. I think because I was exactly the opposite. Like I knew my passion. I still feel like I know my passion. And so I'm feel fortunate to still feel the same way about writing that I did, in the beginning. But it's frustrating. It's hard. It's the kind of thing my dad likes to say, like, if you could see yourself doing anything else, you might want to do that. So I do think about that sometimes, but I don't think at this point there's anything else that I would want to do. So here I am.
Yeah.
And you're good at it too. So stay
appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can we talk about some of the process on Zoe? For instance, how much time does the room spend breaking an episode? How long does each writer have to turn around the script, etc.?
Yeah. So, I think, it's just, I guess things might have been a little bit different this season because of the Zoom room. I feel like I'm like with COVID brain, like I can barely remember what like season 1 was like in comparison, but just like to speak about what season 2 was like that we just completed. So the whole room, and it was an incredible room of writers. I feel like I would want to start just by saying that. I cannot say that enough. From Austin, everyone on staff was so talented, so wonderful, so warm. Like it was really a great mix of people. And I think, I've heard that that's rare, but I've been lucky just in working on ZOEY'S to only have, like, our first season staff was incredible and our second season staff was incredible. So I've just been lucky to sort of get to work with such talented people. And so you put all those brains together, and Austin came into the season with a very clear blueprint for what he wanted where he wanted the story to go. And he knew the end of the season, which I will not spoil, but he knew it walking into the room. So, there's certain things that you map out, and he kind of gave us all his benchmarks and all his ideas. And we knew we had 13 episodes, which is nice to know because you can sort of start breaking, where things land. In the beginning, of the season, we spent a lot of time just talking about big picture arcs and just characters and where we want the journey to sort of take the characters. And so that takes a few weeks. And then once you kind of crystallize that, then you start breaking it down by episode. So it's like, what's the journey of each episode, and where you want characters to be. And so, I don't know that it's exact. Like some episodes take longer to break, some are easier. And so I'd say it takes, a couple weeks to break an episode, when you really get into it. And then the process would be that we would break it in really broad strokes. And then right around that time, it was pretty clear who was writing each episode. And so some staffs are different, but in ZOEY'S, somebody was the writer of every episode and obviously shepherded it and became the voice of that episode. But it is a collaborative art. So like everyone's sort of involved in the whole thing. And that's what is so fun about writing in a writer's room versus when you're just writing a pilot by yourself and you have no one to like beat a joke with, like having, 10 great brains. I think everybody contributed to every, episode, but at the same time, then I can totally tell, who is the writer, like who put their spin on certain things. And I think I wrote the 8th episode, which is the second one back from the break. And I think there are certain things that if you know me or Cruel Musical, like you'll just know, like this is very me, which is wonderful. And then at the same time, there's incredible jokes and things Austin wrote and stuff in the episode that is just the benefit of working on such a good show. So once an episode gets broken, you do a story area document, which sometimes is an actual document. For us this season, because it's a second season show and their comfort with Austin, he would just pitch it verbally to the network in the studio. And so we would write it like a traditional document, but he would just pitch it orally. and then he'd get their, any notes, but usually that was pretty simple process. And then you write an outline, and, at that point in the room, we had certain specific systems, which I won't bore you with, but the way that the way you do an outline, like there's a vernacular within the room, and the way Austin's preferences of what he wanted to see in an outline, and, a lot of things that might be interesting to a viewer or a fan. Every episode is about Zoe. It's Zoe's extraordinary playlist. So I felt like we were always at our best when we were trying to figure out what's happening to Zoe and where her head's at and what's her journey. So a lot of the time that was where the outlines really stemmed from. And then you break it down like pretty specifically. Our outlines were around 13 pages, 14 pages. So, you don't get into all the jokes and all the dialogue, but you do have some in an outline, and you do have a lot of specificity. And, I think the hardest step is the outline writing. Like I think especially on Zoe, like they were such well-written outlines, and so they'd gone through the system of our writer's room so many times that by the time that you went off to script, there was still a lot of work to be done, but not a lot of exploration to be done. Like we'd really kind of kick the tires. And that's different. Some showrunners want you to surprise them. Some showrunners want to bring you something that you don't already know. Not in this case. It was want to stick to the outline. Don't deviate is something we would say. And you have about a week to do the script off of the outline, but that would also include 2 weekends. So, and if you needed a little more time, I think a good adage of writing for TV is always like, unless the cameras are rolling and it needs to be done tomorrow, it's, you'd rather have it right than have it fast. So we always try to get it right. And then once you did a pass, sometimes you'd get notes, or sometimes just right away the room would do a pass. So we would literally put it up on the computer in the whole Zoom room. People would pitch jokes, and, if anything wasn't making sense or beating dialogue, or, if certain scenes like, oh, now that we see it, like this is repetitive or whatever, so you get everybody's brain. And then Austin would always do a pass, and sometimes as the writer, you do it with Austin, or if it was not so much heavy lifting, sometimes he'd just do it on his own. And then you have a table read, and we did all our table reads on Zoom this year, which was really fun. They were in person, obviously, last year in Vancouver, and the writers room would always Zoom in, which was funny because it seems like pre-Zoom, but they would always just sort of have like a camera, and then the writers were up on the TV. But this time everybody was on Zoom, and that actually was super fun. And like I mentioned, I have a 1-year-old daughter, and so she got to come to a lot of the table reads, which is cute. She'd be crawling around while we were doing it. So that was really fun for me as like a working mom. And then after the table read, there's always another pass, and there's notes, and there's always, I think I might have missed in the process, like you get notes from the studio, you get notes from producers, and you get notes from the network. It's a lot of rewriting, I would say. And then there's stuff gets rewritten in production, stuff gets rewritten on set. So it's a lot.
I know you mentioned you're experiencing quarantine brain, but from what you do remember, what would you say are the differences working on Zoom, or do you have any advice navigating Zoom, integrating new people? I'm currently experiencing a Zoom room, so I'm looking for wisdom from people who've done it and how they feel about it.
Yeah, so I think Zoom rooms are wonderful in some ways, but they're very exhausting. Like they're so draining, and I'm sure anyone that's spent any time on Zoom this year knows that Zoom is just tiring. There's lots of reasons for that. One thing I would recommend is the blue light glasses, which I'm wearing. I wear glasses normally. And so I people are like, do they work? But you do have yours. Yeah, I highly recommend it. I find it's such a big difference for me. And also we learned some tips that some of the writers in the room did. Apparently, I don't know where this comes from, but if you turn off your self view, it's supposed to be less tiring because your eyes automatically go to yourself. So if you take that away, it was funny. I was texting one of the other writers on the show. I saw a tweet. It was I think it was something like Stanford University. Don't quote me because I am probably messing up what study it was, but it was here are some tips. And it was turn off your self view. And then it was minimize your screen. And if you can, turn off your computer. And the tweet was did they just create the phone call? It was literally turn your Zoom into a phone call and you will be less tired. So yeah, I think I think the key, I don't know, I don't have a magic, I don't have any magic. I think it was very tiring, which I think everyone would agree. But it's hard for me to judge because I also had a baby. So I don't know if it was Zoom or a baby, or the pandemic. Like, take your pick of what was tiring. I think everything together.
Definitely special circumstances there.
Yeah. But I think under the best of circumstances, even if you are well rested, Zoom is exhausting. And I just try to take it easy. When you're writing on a room, like, there's I always try to focus on the work and not really worry about other projects or other development or whatever. But I would say during the first season, I just had more time for my own writing, and whether it was something I was trying to sell or just even like for fun or, even for reading a book or whatever, like I had to cut down on a lot of that. So I think that really helped at some point, like halfway through the Zoom room, of just realizing, like, this is what I'm doing, and just giving my 100% focus to it, I think helped my tired, which, just to be clear, always 100% focus. But, when you do have downtime, it's easy to be like, oh, let me work on this spec thing I'm working on or whatever. And it wasn't as easy to do that this time around.
So ZOEY'S has a lot of heavy topics,
yes.
Terminal illness and suicide and all of that. So I was wondering, for those topics, like, how do you research them, and how do you go about learning more about these topics?
Great question. Well, I think you may know this, but the premise of the show is based on Austin's real life experience with his father. So, fortunately or unfortunately, we did have an expert in, the process of losing a loved one to that disease. So specifically in the first season, a lot of what's in the show is drawn from his real life experience going through the illness. And then in the second season, a lot of it is he's drawing on his real life experiences with grief. And it's interesting because, there's no coronavirus in the world of ZOEY'S Extraordinary Playlist. And that was the decision Austin made, like, immediately. And I'm so glad he did. I think that was my instinct too, is just like, it's a magical world. And, and it's hard, some shows I totally understand, like a Grey's Anatomy or something that's incorporating, you're in a hospital, or This Is Us, which is incorporating coronavirus. And I get it. Like, in some ways, practically speaking, it makes it easier to film, right? Because your actors get to wear masks. Like, there's certain super practical reasons that you would include the coronavirus. But for a show like ZOEY'S, I think it's 100% the right call to not, like you said, we're dealing with so much heaviness that it just felt like we didn't need that. But at the same time, we're dealing with grief, and we're dealing with loss, and we're dealing with life not going the way you want it to. So in a way, I feel like we were kind of dealing with, at least through ZOEY and the Clark family, like some of the trauma that a lot of us are experiencing through, coronavirus. So that was really interesting. So I think a lot of people had real life moments to draw from. And, a lot of people in the writer's room, you share, writer's rooms are very, can be very personal places, and people shared, their real life experiences and their own losses and their own grief, so I think just drawing on people's real life experiences. Episode 6, which is the last area, I know you haven't seen it yet, but it deals a lot with Simon's experience, in particular, being a Black man in a white world, which is a song he sings in that episode, and then the tech world and just in general. And that, came out of our writer's room, started in June. And so we were having some very heated, intense discussions, as many people were, on the heels of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and watching the protests. And, so we were having the discussions in the writer's room that I think a lot of people were having in a lot of different venues. And I think that Simon's story may have gone in that direction anyway, but certainly, what was going on in everyone's consciousness in current events certainly accelerated it. And then having writers like my friend and fellow writer Zora Bikangaga, who wrote that episode, he was able to draw on a lot of his experiences being a Black man, being a Black writer, sometimes the only Black voice in a room. And we also turned to John, who plays Simon, for his own experience, and he lent a lot of, and I think there's even certain phrases and the way he spoke that ended up in the script and had words that Simon said that really came from John's experience. And that was also true of, other episodes. Like in the first season, the episode that has to do with Mo's experience in church, I know came from a conversation Alex had with the writers of that episode in the writer's room, just talking about his personal experience. And so I think a lot when, whenever you have someone that's experienced something specific and lends itself to a character story, it's always wonderful when you can use that as part of the authenticity of the work.
Yeah, and I've heard that your writer's room has a lot of writers who've faced trauma and all sorts of things. So having that all in the writer's room and talking about that constantly, how is that? How does that affect the writer's room? How do you feel like that's different?
That's interesting. I don't know if I would characterize it as like everybody in the room having experienced trauma. I think there was sort of a good mix of like, and this sort of speaks to the tone of the show, sort of comedy writers and drama writers. And not that a comedy writer cannot have experienced trauma, but I think there is a lightheartedness in the room, and there is, in the way that the show likes to break up the heaviness with jokes and with singing. I think that there are like a few of the writers I can think of in particular who would bring a lot of the jokes to the table and a lot of, the levity, like that was sort of true of their personality in the room as well. So that was nice. I think, I think with any show you work on or any project you work on, if you're tapping into something personal, which a lot of times you are in whatever capacity, and that's why you're writing the project or why you got hired to write the project, it can be, exhausting emotionally. It can be something that you kind of have to work through. I mean, a more lighthearted example is the book I wrote, Cherry, which is about 4 girls in high school. And it's, that's a lot of what's in the book is fiction completely. And a lot of it is drawn, from my high school experiences. And so I am lucky to have had a mostly very positive high school experience, but even just the act of writing something down and like sort of giving it to another medium and taking your story and making it accessible to other people, you kind of have to just embrace that you're putting something out in the world in a way that you no longer control it. And I remember I had some big feelings about like certain things of like my high school experience that were kind of going to be like, not that they were going to be done forever, but I was going to sort of release them into this book. And so I think there's things that when we, I think for Austin, when he writes about his story with his dad, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think he's also kind of releasing some of the story and releasing, some of it into the work. Right. So I think that that's true for other stories. And there's one story that's, I think that's coming up in the second half of the season that I don't want to spoil, but it has to do with mental health stuff that is important to me. And I think that there were a couple writers in particular who had experienced certain things in their life that were able to be taken and used as part of this story. So, that's another example. I'm sorry, I can't be more specific, but I think you'll know when you see it.
We'll find out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that you balance these topics and story and humor and songs all in one. Do you find it hard or easy to like the angle is, Zoe sees these musical numbers. Is it easy or hard to include these musical numbers? Like, does everyone have a musical background?
Great question. No is the short answer. Everyone does not have a musical background. Certainly, a lot of it starts with Austin, and he does have an incredible musical background and has, written a musical that was on Broadway and, at least a theater background. But I think everyone who works on the show, has a love of music. So that's a good starting place. But look, there's a very specific style and a very specific way that music is used. And, Austin created that over the first 2 seasons along with the writer's room, but I think it sort of came from a specific vision. Another important piece about the musical process has to do with the choreography, and that has to do with Mandy Moore and her associate choreographers who are so incredible. And that, it's a little bit of it's definitely a back and forth collaboration, but I would say the storytelling and the way that music is used, it certainly starts in the writer's room, but I think Mandy always has her feelings and notes, and sometimes we'll push back on certain things. And, you know, it's one thing for us to have an idea, oh, and then Simon's just going to dance around. And she's like, okay, but, you know, how? And one piece that we always try to connect to every song, as Austin would say it, is that every song has a conceit. So it's not just then Simon dances around. There's something specifically attached to what's happening while the song is happening. A good example of that is episode 2 of season 1 is Sucker, right? Like Skylar Max is singing to Zoe while she's trying to give a speech to the programmers on her first day. So it's not just Skylar singing, or Max singing, it's Max singing as Zoe is trying to function. So that's an example of a conceit where it's not just singing, it's singing in a narrative, singing in something that brings some extra oomph to the storytelling. And some songs, frankly, are more just for enjoyment. We just want, you know, Alex to sing this song, so he's going to sing the song. But for the most part, I think the songs work their best when they really drive story, when they really reveal something about a character, when they really take a turn in a story, you know, all the things that are kind of classic storytelling. But sometimes songs are very easy. Like there's a few, like I'm just thinking about my episode, in particular, there was one song that was literally the first song Austin pitched. It is in the final cut. There's another song, we probably listened to 200 songs, you know, and like the one that's in there, I don't even know if it was the first choice, but it's great. But there's just a process. So sometimes it's really easy, and sometimes it is really not easy to find the right song. And then not just finding the right song, but the song has to clear. Almost always the song cleared, but sometimes, you know, there were certain artists that were super difficult to get, or, you know, just we would stay away from in general. And then, you know, the other thing is trying to have balance, and you want different kinds of songs, and we don't want to use the same artist 2 times in one episode, or if we just use a song, if 2 songs sounded too similar. I think that sort of explains why one of the songs had so many options, was because it was the one that we kept landing on was so similar to another song in the episode. So, you know, that's another problem that songs kind of get disqualified from use. So
is there a structure or a format, like how many we need to have, like this amount of songs per episode, or is it?
So we would try to have, I would say a sweet spot is around like 5 songs. There's some episodes that only have 4. I would say 5 would be like the baseline, 4 or 5, but a lot of episodes end up having 6. There's a few coming up that have, you know, like I think the bigger episode 9, I think has 8 songs. You know, the finale, I think, has 7. You know, there's some big song episodes coming. So that there are exceptions that can be made, but I think 5 or 6, 5 is kind of the baseline. And that, you know, there's 6 act, we write a 6-act format. So, you know, sometimes there ends up being 6 where there's 1 in every act. That's another like challenge you might not think about with the songs. Like you can't have all the songs in the first act. Like we need to spread out the storytelling. So sometimes in like the jigsaw puzzle of the writer's room, you know, you'd want, for a certain story, it makes sense to have a song in act 2, but then there's 3 stories with songs in act 2. You know, you have to spread it out. So that's just another reality of the network format and the act breaks. But even if it was streaming and there were no act breaks, you'd still want, you know, you wouldn't want all your songs right in a row. That would not be as satisfying.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite musical number of all the songs?
Oh my gosh, that's a hard question. I do not have one favorite. That would be impossible. Okay. I probably have one favorite like per actor. You know, there's a lot of songs that I love. I think one that's like particularly gratifying just for me, like as a writer, I wrote episode 106 last year, which was ZOEY'S Extraordinary Night Out, which was Simon and Jessica's engagement party. And in that one, Max sings 500 Miles, I Will Walk 500 Miles. Mm-hmm. And that was one of my favorite, that's like a personal favorite musical number, because I think it was something that I pushed for creatively, and then it was kind of a disaster in production. Just like we were out at night. It was one take at night in the rain in Vancouver with 100 extras. It was just a very big scale, and a lot went on behind the scenes that was stressful and wonderful. And I'm very, very proud of that moment. And I think it's something that I think has stuck with fans too, which is just cool for me. Like in terms of, the Max Zoe storytelling, that was kind of a important moment for them. So for those reasons, that's probably a soft spot. But I like in any given episode, there's so many that I love. So that's hard to pick.
Do you know if when conceiving the show, Austin ever considered making it original music numbers, or was it always jukebox?
Oh, funny you should ask. No, I think it was always pop music. That's like I think that's part of what is so joyful about it is like, the song in a context, whatever context, the song, and now you're seeing us use it in a different sort of way. I think that adds a little bit of like joy to the process. There is an original song coming up. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but in my episode, there is an original song, which I'm very excited about. And I actually got a co-writing credit on because it was in my episode. So I got to, Austin was definitely his brainchild, and I got to help. And along with Harvey Mason Jr., who does all the music and arrangements, he did the music for the song. And so that's in episode 8. I think that's the first original song that's going to be in ZOEY'S, which I'm excited about. Sometimes we joke in the writer's room when we need a very specific type of song. Like love songs are easy, like mad songs are easy. Like there's a lot of songs that fall into certain buckets. But if you need I'm regretful of this decision I made song, like it can be difficult to find the right one. So sometimes we're like, we just have to write a song and then use it in this like specific moment. Or there's times where you find the right song, but the lyrics don't, like it sounds right, but then the lyrics are wrong. And we're like, you could just like change the lyrics. So I think sometimes it would help our storytelling if we could write songs, but I'm very excited about the original song that is coming. I hope people like it.
We'll let you know our thoughts.
Awesome.
Thank you. Yes. Yes. Appreciate it.
Do you have a favorite episode or episodes that you've done?
Again, there's that's hard to pick. I feel like there's a lot of episodes that I really love. I think one of my favorites that stands out is episode 8 from season 1, which is ZOEY'S Extraordinary Glitch, just because I was up on set for a little bit of the filming of that one, and Jane just did such an extraordinary job, so no pun intended, but that was just really, I think, some of her best work, and I loved that. But I think that might be one of my favorites, just as a fan of, but and then thinking about, I think the finale last year, like American Pie, which ended the season, like if I was gonna pick another, it's almost not fair to be like that would be my favorite musical number because it was just so grand. But that was pretty special, and I felt like the way that was done. But there's there's a lot of good stuff coming up in the back of the season. Like I'm excited, but I feel like, I hope it seemed like there was a lot of positive reaction to what's been put out in the second season, but I think the season really hits a stride, and I think there's a lot of good stuff coming, and I think people will be pleasantly surprised about where it goes.
We're excited to see it.
Nice.
So you do a ton of TV writing, and you've written a novel and have another novel. Yes. So what's the difference between writing a novel and a TV show, basically?
Oh gosh, great question. Yeah, I've been lucky to get to write like TV and also features and novel and theater, and so I think all 4 of those lanes are very different, but there's like at the core, I sort of approach them all the same, which is, who is the character? Why do we care about them? What do they want? What is the obstacle to what they want? I think the themes are all usually similar for me in terms of why I get excited about a project and then my process of actually writing. But it's sometimes you have to, like, I think there are certain times where I'll have an idea and I think, oh, this is going to be a feature. And then like there was something I'm working on right now that I thought I'm actually writing with a co-writer, and we had sort of been thinking about it as a feature, and we had almost started writing it as a feature, and then we were like, you know what, this should just be like a pilot. Like this really, like this is a world that we'd want to live in for a longer time, and like yes, there's a 90-minute version, but we would just so much rather get to do the 10-hour version, right? So in a perfect world, let's just write. And so sometimes I think the subject matter dictates the form, but I think, for me, I really like getting to jump it's easier for me to work on multiple projects if they're in different mediums. Like I think it's hard to work on multiple TV projects at once and we're kind of all in the same lane. But I actually like it. It helps my brain to kind of switch from, complete sentences to more dialogue to, longer form. So I think that, there's inherent differences in terms of structure and, obviously format, but I think I just I approach all the writing the same way. So I think there's more similarities for me personally.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. And then it looks like you are working on Death is My BFF.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that's a project I've been involved with for a while now. It's based on a Wattpad novel. If you guys have ever checked out Wattpad, it's a place where people can sort of self-publish stories on the internet. It's kind of like a literary YouTube sort of is a way to describe Wattpad, but it's a community and people, write stories, write novels, and people can sort of comment and there's feedback, involved. And I think, so the Death is My BFF began as a novel on Wattpad, and it's a book that then spawned a whole series of books and, has the whole series overall has had 100 million reads or something astronomical, right? But like that. So the world and the characters was created by a very talented younger writer who, was, I was fortunate enough to get to meet through this process, and she optioned her story through Wattpad to Sony Pictures, and I've worked on some projects with Sony before, so it was what you'd call an open writing assignment, which means they had the IP, they had the book, and they were looking for a writer. So I met with them and I sort of pitched my take, like, here's what I would do if you hire me. And they said, great, we would like to hire you. And so I came up, sort of fleshed out that take into a pitch, so a full TV pitch. And then we went out and pitched a few different networks, including Sci-Fi. And Sci-Fi ultimately ended up buying it, which was awesome and sort of I don't necessarily think of myself as a genre writer, but this is a genre project. It's sort of in the vein of like a Buffy or a Twilight. It's in that sort of world centered around a teenage girl. So again, like that's what I could sort of hook into. And it's a really awesome world that Kat created and I got to flesh out. And I ended up writing the pilot for Sci-Fi. And then just this past fall, Sci-Fi ended up passing on the project more for like, I would say timing than anything else. And I think also having some things to do with just what Sci-Fi is doing internally. And so technically what that means is that the project's in what you call turnaround, which means that now Sony as a studio controls the property again. So even though we sold it to Sci-Fi, they paid me to write it, they've sort of relinquished their rights. And so now Kat extended her deal with Sony. And so they're in the process of trying to figure out, okay, so what does this look like? Is there a lead actress we can attach? Is there a director that we want to bring in on the project? And so putting some different pieces together, and I'm hopeful that they will be able to. And then once that happens, we'll go back to, different streaming services, or honestly, like, even though it's just 2 years later, there are streaming services that exist now that didn't exist when we were working on it before, like Peacock or HBO Max. They weren't even up and running at the time when we were talking to people. And even places like Netflix or Amazon or Apple, they all have different leadership. So that's just like a reel about the industry. Things are always kind of shuffling. So I'd say at the moment, like literally it's in what we call turnaround, which basically just means we're, sort of regrouping. But I'm hopeful that Sony will be able to put the pieces together and then figure out what to do with it.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it.
I mean, it's very fun. I'm very excited about it. So I hope that it comes together.
We are running low on time, so maybe we'll close with one or two more questions.
Sure.
So do you have any favorite writing advice or books?
Yes, I do. My favorite book about writing is Anne Lamott, Bird by Bird, which I don't know if you guys have read. It's actually about novel writing. So interesting, like when you ask about different forms, but the subtitle for Bird by Bird is Advice on Writing and Life, which I just like love that just like subtitle. And Bird by Bird is an interesting title, but she explains why in the book. And It's a book that I've read many times, and I highly recommend it no matter what form of writing you're writing. It's an incredible resource. If you're writing a novel, certainly, but even TV writing, feature writing, it's just general advice. And sometimes I find like if I'm writing something and I get stuck, I'll just start reading word by word. Like I'll just jump back in and I'll reread it again. And then inevitably, I usually don't make it all the way to the end. Like by the time I'm halfway through or I'm like, okay, now I'm like, it regenerates. So I highly recommend that book as a place to go to. And one adage that she says in the book, which I've highly adopted, her whole strategy can basically be boiled down to shitty first drafts. And it's just like releasing you from having to be good right away. Because I think that that's something that keeps people from writing. Like a fully written anything is better than a half written anything, period. So I think that and that's hard to learn. It's even if you're on a deadline, even if you have somebody waiting for your draft, it's not as perfect on the page as it was in your head. And so that can stymie your whole process. So I literally, I was just working on something. I just finished a new spec pilot that I'm really excited about. That's set in 1999 in the music industry. And it's something I've been working on for a long time. And it's a musical Elements. And I'm so excited. But I needed to finish it because people were waiting on it. And I literally had to write down on a piece of paper. And it said, I just wrote, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be written. And it was just like, that's it. And every time I would get frustrated, I would just look at it. So that's a lot, I think, into my brain about how I write. And probably the other piece of advice I would add to that is, there are certainly some writers, especially novelists, that, they write however many thousand words a day, or they write for this many hours. And I'm not that kind of writer. I'm more of an ebb and flow kind of writer, which is why I like, freelancing. I like working on different projects. There are some times where I will write 16 hours a day for a week, and then I won't write for a month. It's just, there's times where I'm on a deadline and I have to finish, and I do. And then sometimes it's not a writing mode. So I think that's important too. I think sometimes some of my friends beat themselves up because they didn't write today. And I think as a professional, you have to learn the difference between, just being in a bad mood and being in a mood where you're not going to write. Because you have to, we all have to work through our bad moods. But I do think there's a time where it's not a writing day. And that's okay. Every day does not have to be a writing day. And that's, just giving yourself permission to do that, I think is important.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. You talked about selling pilots before, Zoe. Can you talk about, do you have any advice in selling pilots and advice in pitching?
Yeah, I love pitching, which is interesting because I'm really not a performer and I don't like being on stage. And some of my writer friends think about pitching as performing, and I don't, because that would scare me. But I think that there's, I think one thing that is important, and I think it's important in anything. You have to be enthusiastic about the things that you're working on and pitching and writing. And, I think that always helps, in a pitch. I'm learning better now. You can't fake it. And sometimes, look, a job is a job. And sometimes if you have an opportunity, there's ways to find a way to get excited about anything. But if you can, and if you're choosing, what to spend thousands of hours working on, just to make sure that you're really passionate about the subject matter and that you have a real reason for wanting to tell the story. Because, 20 drafts in, 100 notes calls later, it's gonna be a far cry from where you started. So, if your excitement for a story has to do with a flashy moment or a line of dialogue or this or that, it's easy to get disillusioned. But if it's really at its core, I'm interested in a dynamic between sisters, okay, that's what it's about. And then everything else will change, but at least you're still writing about this dynamic that you find interesting. So in terms of pitching, and then, I just always try to, come from a place of excitement. And I think that shows. And I think that that's why I've been able to get some of the jobs that I've gotten. I'm working on a pitch right now for a movie project that I'm super excited about. And, I think they know when you're faking it, right? So, I'm sure there's writers out there that can fake it better than I can, but it's nice to be able to be this is a dream and I would like to write it for you. And I'm not a very good actor, so it's either convincing or it's not real. But yeah, but I think there's lots of resources online and places to Google, in terms of if you're looking for format of your pitch, like that's kind of out there. But I always like to start with why I'm enthusiastic about something, and then also why I'm the right writer for the job. Because I think in a scenario where you are going up against other writers, look, there's enough work for everyone. I'm definitely, well, look, it's hard. Work is hard, but I would say, I think it's important to celebrate other people's successes. Like, I think, like, you guys have a strong writing community, and I, have my writer friends. Like, you want to be able to just wholeheartedly applaud anytime somebody has success, because I feel like there's a rising tides lift all, ships mentality. But at the same time, if there's one writer that's going to get hired for the job, you do want to put your foot forward and explain, why it's you, or at least what's unique about you that can really, show up in your work on a certain project if you're the one that's hired.
Awesome. Yeah, I heard the why me, why now approach.
Yeah, why me, why now? Because even if it's not, an open writing assignment you could be pitching against other people, but even if it's just an original idea and you're just like going into a production company and, there's still a why me, why now, because it's like, why, and maybe you've had ideas that have stuck with you, and that's also a why, because, you can't shake them. There's one project that I've literally been developing since 2009, and I still think about it, and it's still something that I hope to sell one day, and it'll be one of those stories that's like, all these years later, it stuck with you. But I think I think there's something to be said for the projects that stick around.
Definitely. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. We have one more question. What is one of your favorite jokes, either your own or someone else's?
Oh, just jokes in general?
Yeah. Favorite joke. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I have no idea. Wow.
Fair. I mean, if you're not a performer, it's hard to have jokes on hand. That's more of a performer kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because where my brain just went is like, because I've been watching a lot of Sesame Street lately because I have a 1-year-old. And they did a joke that is just like, it's like funny because it's a joke that I remember thinking was so funny as a kid, but it's like still funny to me, which is just like, it's a knock joke. All right, knock.
Yes.
Who's there?
Interrupting cow.
Interrupting cow.
Anyways, my daughter got a kick out of it. She's one. I still think it's funny. Yeah. If that tells you anything about my comic abilities, that is my favorite joke.
I think it says your comic abilities are spot on, because that joke is hilarious no matter what age.
It doesn't get old.
Yeah. I knew the punchline, but I still laughed before it.
But they actually they did it, whatever. I mean, me being like, Sesame Street's brilliant. Clearly it's brilliant. But it was like, they did this thing where they did the joke, but then the cow literally just kept interrupting segments. And I was like, this is smart. Smart job, Sesame Street. Good job.
Yeah.
Good job.
That's a great running guy.
Anyways, I'm going to be watching a lot of Disney movies and Elmo and in a new chapter.
Little Mermaid 2, very underrated.
Oh yeah,
Definitely.
So was Cinderella 3 as well.
Oh my god.
I watched that like a month ago.
I mean, this is great. This is great to know.
Disney Plus comes in handy.
Our next podcast will be what to watch with your kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lindsey. This is great. We had a blast. We learned a lot.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the season.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
Subscribe for more episodes and check out Sketches written and performed by Deadline Junkies. Watch it at skedjes.com. Thanks for listening to the Deadline Junkies podcast.